In the history of science, the collector of specimens preceded the zoologist and followed the exponents of natural theology and magic. He had ceased to study animals in the spirit of the authors of the bestiaries, for whom the ant was incarnate industry, the panther an emblem, surprisingly enough, of Christ, the polecat a shocking example of uninhibited lasciviousness. But, except in a rudimentary way, he was not yet a physiologist, ecologist, or student of animal behavior. His primary concern was to make a census to catch, kill, stuff, and describe as many kinds of beasts as he could lay his hands on. Like the earth of 100 years ago, our mind still has its darkest Africas, its unmapped Borneos and Amazonian basins. In relation to the fauna of these regions, we are not yet zoologists. We are mere naturalists and collectors of specimens. The fact is unfortunate, but we have to accept it. We have to make the best of it. However lowly, the work of the collector must be done before we can proceed to the higher scientific tasks of classification, analysis, experiment, and theory-making. If you go to New South Wales, you will see marsupials hopping about the countryside, and if you go to the antipodes of the self-conscious mind, you will encounter all sorts of creatures at least as odd as kangaroos. You do not invent these creatures any more than you invent marsupials. They live their own lives in complete independence. A man cannot control them. All he can do is go to their mental equivalent of Australia and look around him. Some people never consciously discover their antipodes. Others make an occasional landing. Yet others, but they are very few, find it easy to go and come as they please. For the naturalist of the mind, the collector of psychological specimens, the primary need is some safe, easy, and reliable method of transporting himself and others from the old world to the new, from the continent of familiar cows and horses to the continent of the wallaby and the platypus. Two such methods exist. Neither of them is perfect, but both are sufficiently reliable, sufficiently easy, and sufficiently safe to justify their employment by those who know what they are doing. In the first case, the soul is transported to its far-off destination by the aid of a chemical, either mescaline or lysergic acid. In the second case, the vehicle is psychological in nature, and the passage to the mind's antipodes is accomplished by hypnosis. The two vehicles carry the consciousness to the same region, but the drug has the longer range and takes its passengers further into the terra incognita. How and why does hypnosis produce its observed effects? We do not know. For our present purposes, however, we do not have to know. All that is necessary in this context is to record the fact that some hypnotic subjects are transported in the trance state to a region in the mind's antipodes where they find the equivalent of marsupials, strange psychological creatures leading to an autonomous existence according to the law of their own being. About the physiological effects of mescaline we know a little. Probably, for we are not yet certain, it interferes with the enzyme system that regulates cerebral functioning. By doing so, it lowers the efficiency of the brain as an instrument for focusing mind on the problems of life on the surface of our planet. This lowering of what may be called the biological efficiency of the brain seems to permit the entry into consciousness of certain classes of mental events which are normally excluded because they possess no survival value. Similar intrusions of biologically useless but aesthetically and sometimes spiritually valuable material may occur as the result of illness or fatigue, or they may be induced by fasting or a period of confinement in a place of darkness and complete silence. A person under the influence of mescaline or lysergic acid will stop seeing visions when given a large dose of nicotinic acid. This helps to explain the effectiveness of fasting as an inducer of visionary experience. By reducing the amount of available sugar, fasting lowers the brain's biological efficiency and so makes possible the entry into consciousness of material possessing no survival value. Moreover, By causing a vitamin deficiency, it removes from the blood that known inhibitor of visions, nicotinic acid. Another inhibitor of visionary experience is ordinary everyday perceptual experience. Experimental psychologists have found that if you confine a man to a restricted environment where there is no light, no sound, nothing to smell, and if you put him in a tepid bath with only one almost imperceptible thing to touch, the victim will very soon start seeing things, hearing things, and having strange bodily sensations. Milarepa, in his Himalayan cavern, and the anchorites of the Thebaid followed essentially the same procedure and got essentially the same results. 1,000 pictures of the temptations of St. Anthony bear witness to the effectiveness of restricted diet and restricted environment. Asceticism, it is evident, has a double motivation. If men and women torment their bodies, it is not only because they hope in this way to atone for past sins and avoid future punishments. It is also because they long to visit the mind's antipodes and do some visionary sightseeing. Empirically, and from the reports of other ascetics, they know that fasting in a restricted environment will transport them where they long to go. Their self-inflicted punishment may be the door to paradise. It may also, and this is a point which will be discussed in a later paragraph, be a door into the infernal regions. From the point of view of an inhabitant of the old world, marsupials are exceedingly odd, but oddity is not the same as randomness. Kangaroos and wallabies may lack verisimilitude, but their improbability repeats itself and obeys recognizable laws. The same is true of the psychological creatures inhabiting the remoter regions of our minds. The experiences encountered under the influence of mescaline or deep hypnosis are certainly strange, but they are strange with a certain regularity, strange according to a pattern. What are the common features which the pattern imposes upon our visionary experiences? First, and most important, is the experience of light. Everything seen by those who visit the mind's antipodes is brilliantly illuminated, and seems to shine from within. All colors are intensified to a pitch beyond anything seen in the normal state, and at the same time, the mind's capacity for recognizing fine distinctions of tone and hue is notably heightened. In this respect, there is a marked difference between the visionary experience and ordinary dreams. Most dreams are without color or else are only partially or feebly colored. On the other hand, the visions met with under the influence of mescaline or hypnosis are always intensely, and one might say preternaturally, brilliant in color. Professor Calvin Hall, who has collected records of many thousands of dreams, tells us that about 2/3 of all dreams are in black and white. Only 1 dream in 3 is colored or has some color in it. A few people dream entirely in color, a few never experience color in their dreams. The majority sometimes dream in color, but more often do not. We have come to the conclusion, writes Dr. Hall, that colored in dreams yield no information about the personality of the dreamer. I agree with this conclusion. Color in dreams and visions tells us no more about the personality of the beholder than does color in the external world. A garden in July is perceived as brightly colored. The perception tells us something about sunshine, flowers, and butterflies, but little or nothing about our own selves. In the same way, the fact that we see brilliant colors in our visions and in some of our dreams tells us something about the fauna of our mind's antipodes, but nothing whatever about the personality who inhabits what I have called the old world of the mind. Most dreams are concerned with the dreamer's private wishes and instinctive urges, and with the conflicts which arise when these wishes and urges are thwarted by a disapproving conscience or a fear of public opinion. To be effective, symbols do not require to be colored. Color turns out to be a touchstone of reality. That which is given is colored, that which our symbol-creating intellect and fancy put together is uncolored. Presentation to consciousness of a given non-human fact. The images of the archetypal world are symbolic. But since we as individuals do not fabricate them but find them out there in the collective unconscious, they exhibit at least some of the characteristics of given reality and are colored. The non-symbolic inhabitants of the mind's antipodes exist in their own right, and like the given facts of the external world, are colored. Indeed, they are far more intensely colored than external data. This may be explained, at least in part, by the fact that our perceptions of the external world are habitually clouded by the verbal notions in terms of which we do our thinking. We are forever attempting to convert things into signs for the most intelligible abstractions of our own invention, but in doing so, we rob some things of a great deal of their native thinghood. At the antipodes of the mind, we are more or less completely free of our language outside the system of conceptual thought. Consequently, our perception of visionary objects possesses all the freshness, all the naked intensity, of experiences which have never been verbalized, never assimilated to lifeless abstractions. Their color, that hallmark of givenness, shines forth with a brilliance which seems to be preternatural, because it is in fact entirely natural in the sense of being entirely unsophisticated by language or the scientific, philosophical, and utilitarian notions, by means of which we ordinarily recreate the given world in our drearily human image. In his Candle of Vision, the Irish poet A.E. George Russell has analyzed his visionary experiences with remarkable acuity. When I meditate, he writes, I feel in the thoughts and images that throng about me the reflections of personality. But there are also windows in the soul through which can be seen images created not by the human, but by the divine imagination. Our linguistic habits lead us into error. For example, we are apt to say I imagine when what we should have said is the curtain was lifted that I might see. Spontaneous or induced, visions are never our personal property. Memories belong to the ordinary self, have no place in them. The things seen are wholly unfamiliar. There is no reference or resemblance, in Sir William Herschel's phrase, to any objects recently seen or even thought of. When faces appear, they are never the faces of friends or acquaintances. We are out of the old world and exploring the antipodes. Light, color, and significance do not exist in isolation. They modify or are manifested by objects. Are there any special classes of objects common to most visionary experiences? The answer is yes, there are. Under mescaline and hypnosis, as well as in spontaneous visions, certain classes of perceptual experiences turn up again and again. The typical mescaline or lysergic acid experience begins with the perceptions of colored, moving, living geometrical forms. In time, pure geometry becomes concrete, and the visionary perceives, not patterns, but patterned things, such as carpets, carvings, mosaics. These give place to vast and complicated buildings in the midst of the landscapes, which change continuously, passing from richness to more intensely colored richness, from grandeur to deepening grandeur. Heroic figures of the kind that Blake called the seraphim may make their appearance, alone or in multitudes. Fabulous animals move across the scene. Everything is novel and amazing. Almost never does the visionary see anything that reminds him of his own past. He is not remembering scenes, persons, or objects, and he is not inventing them. He is looking on at a new creation. Every mescaline experience, every vision arising under hypnosis, is unique, but all recognizably belong to the same species. The landscapes, the architectures, the clustering gems, the brilliant and intricate patterns, these, in their atmosphere of preternatural light, preternatural color, and preternatural significance, are the stuff of which the mind's antipodes are made. Why this should be so, we have no idea. It is a brute fact of experience which, whether we like it or not, we have to accept. just as we have to accept the fact of the kangaroos. From these facts of visionary experience, let us now pass to the accounts preserved in all the cultural traditions of other worlds, the worlds inhabited by the gods, by the spirits of the dead, by man in his primal state of innocence. Reading these accounts, we are immediately struck by the close similarity between induced or spontaneous visionary experience and the heavens and fairylands of folklore and religion. Preternatural light, preternatural intensity of coloring, preternatural significance. These are characteristics of all the other worlds and golden ages, and in virtually every case, this preternaturally significant light shines on or shines out of a landscape of such surpassing beauty that words cannot express it. Similar descriptions are to be found in the eschatological literature of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam. Heaven is always a place of gems. Why should this be the case? Those who think of all human activities in terms of social and economic frame of reference will give some such answer as this: gems are very rare on earth. Few people possess them. To compensate themselves for these facts, the spokesmen for the poverty-stricken majority have filled their imaginary heavens with precious stones. This Picken, the sky hypothesis contains no doubt some element of truth, but it fails to explain why precious stones should have come to be regarded as precious in the first place. Men have spent enormous amounts of time, energy, and money on finding, mining, and cutting of colored pebbles. Why? This utilitarian can offer no explanation for such fantastic behavior. But as soon as we take into account the facts of visionary experience, everything becomes clear. In vision, men perceive a profusion of what Ezekiel calls stones of fire, or what Ware Mitchell describes as transparent fruit. These things are self-luminous, exhibit a preternatural brilliance of color, and possess a preternatural significance. The material objects which most nearly resemble these sources of visionary illumination are gemstones. To acquire such a stone is to acquire something whose preciousness is guaranteed by the fact that it exists in the other world. Hence man's otherwise inexplicable passion for gems, and hence his attribution to precious stones of therapeutic and magical virtue. The causal chain, I am convinced, begins in the psychological other world of visionary experience, descends to earth, and mounts again to the theological other world of heaven. In this context, the words of Socrates in Phaedo take on a new significance. There exists, he tells us, an ideal world above and beyond the world of matter. In this other earth, the colors are much purer and much more brilliant than they are down here. The very mountains, the very stones have a richer gloss, a lovelier transparency and intensity of hue. The precious stones of this lower world are highly prized cornelians, jaspers, emeralds, and all the rest are but the tiny fragments of these stones above. In the other earth there is no stone, but is precious and exceeds in beauty every gem of ours. In other words, precious stones are precious because they bear a faint resemblance to the glowing marvel seen with the inner eye of the visionary. The view of that world, says Plato, is a vision of blessed beholders, for to see things as they are in themselves is bliss unalloyed and inexpressible. Among people who have no knowledge of precious stones or of glass, heaven is adorned not with minerals but flowers. Preternaturally brilliant flowers bloom in most of the other worlds described by primitive eschatologists, and even in the begemmed and glassy paradise of the more advanced religions, they have their place. One remembers the lotus of Hindu and Buddhist tradition, the roses and lilies of the West. God first planted a garden. This statement expresses a deep psychological truth. Horticulture has its source, or at any rate one of its sources, in the other world of the mind's antipodes. When worshippers offer flowers at the altar, they are returning to the gods things which they know, or if they are not visionaries, obscurely feel, to be indigenous to heaven. And this return to the source is not merely symbolical. It is also a matter of immediate experience, for the traffic between our old world and its antipodes, between here and beyond, travels along a two-way street. Gems, for example, come from the soul's visionary heaven, but they also lead the soul back to that heaven. Contemplating them, men find themselves, as the phrase goes, transported, carried away towards that other earth of the Platonic dialogue, the magical place where every pebble is a precious stone, and the same effects may be produced by artifacts of glass and metal, by tapers burning in the dark, by brilliantly colored images and ornaments, by flowers, shells, and feathers, by landscapes seen as Shelley from the Euganeian hills saw Venice, in the transfiguring light of dawn or sunset. Indeed, we may risk a generalization and say that whatever in nature or in a work of art resembles one of those intensely significant, inwardly glowing objects encountered at the mind's antipodes is capable of inducing, if only in a partial and attenuated form, the visionary experience. At this point, a hypnotist will remind us that, if he can be induced to stare intently at a shiny object, a patient may go into trance, and that if he goes into trance, or if he goes only into reverie, he may very well see visions within and a transfigured world without. But how, precisely, and why does the view of a shiny object induce a trance or a state of reverie? Is it, as the Victorians maintained, a simple matter of eye strain resulting in general nervous exhaustion, or shall we explain the phenomenon in purely psychological terms, as concentration pushed to the point of monoideism and leading to disassociation? And there is a third possibility. Shiny objects may remind our unconscious of what it enjoys at the mind's antipodes, and these obscure intimations of life in the other world are so fascinating that we pay less attention to this world, and so become capable of experiencing consciously something of that which, unconsciously, is always with us. We see, then, that there are in nature certain scenes, certain classes of objects, certain materials, possessed of the power to transport the beholder's mind in the direction of its antipodes, out of everyday here and towards the other world of vision. Similarly, in the realm of art, we find certain works, even certain classes of works, in which the same transporting power is manifest. These vision-inducing works may be executed in vision-inducing materials, such as glass, metal, gems, or gem-like pigments. In other cases, their power is due to the fact that they render in some peculiarly expressive way some transporting scene or object. The best vision-inducing art is produced by men and women who have themselves had the visionary experience, but it is also possible for any reasonably good artist, simply by following an approved recipe, to create works which shall have at least some transporting power. Religious art has always and everywhere made use of these vision-inducing materials. The shrine of gold, the chrysanthemine statue, the jeweled symbol or image, the glittering furniture of the altar. We find these things in contemporary Europe as in ancient Egypt, in India and China, as among the Greeks, the Incas, the Aztecs. Plato. And during a later flowering of religious art, St. Thomas Aquinas maintained that pure, bright colors were the very essence of artistic beauty. A Matisse, in that case, would be intrinsically superior to a Goya or a Rembrandt. One has to only translate the philosopher's abstractions into concrete terms to see that this equation of beauty in general with bright, pure colors is absurd. But though untenable as it stands, the venerable doctrine is not altogether devoid of truth. Bright, pure colors are characteristic of the other world. Consequently, works of art painted in bright, pure colors are capable, in suitable circumstances, of transporting the beholder's mind in the direction of its antipodes. Bright, pure colors are the essence, not of beauty in general, but only of a special kind of beauty, the visionary. Gothic churches and Greek temples, the statues of the 13th century after Christ and of the 5th century before Christ, all were brilliantly colored. For the Greeks and the men of the Middle Ages, this art of the merry-go-round and the waxwork show was evidently transporting. To us it seems deplorable. We prefer our praxiteles plain, our marble and our limestone au naturel. Why should our modern taste be so different in this respect from that of our ancestors? The reason, I presume, is that we have become too familiar with bright pigments to be greatly moved by them. We admire them, of course, when we see them in some grand or subtle composition, but in themselves, and as such, they leave us untransported. Sentimental lovers of the past complain of the drabness of our age and contrast it unfavorably with the gay brilliance of earlier times. In actual fact, of course, there is a far greater profusion of color in modern than in the ancient world. Lapis lazuli and Tylian purple were costly rarities. The rich velvets and brocades of princely wardrobes, the woven or painted hangings of medieval and early modern houses were reserved for a privileged minority. Even the great ones of the earth possessed very few of these vision-inducing treasures. As late as the 17th century, monarchs owned so little furniture that they had to travel from palace to palace with wagon-loads of plate and bedspreads, of carpets and tapestries. For the great mass of the people there were only homespun and a few vegetable dyes, and for interior decoration there were at best the earth colors, at worst, and in most cases, the floor of plaster and the walls of dung. At the antipodes of every mind lay the outer world of preternatural light and preternatural color, of ideal gems and visionary gold, but before every pair of eyes was only the dark squalor of the family hovel, the dust or mud of the village street, the dirty whites, the duns and goose-turd greens of ragged clothing. Hence a passionate and almost desperate thirst for bright, pure colors, and hence the overpowering effect produced by such colors whenever in church or at court they were displayed. Today the chemical industry turns out paints, inks, and dyes in endless variety and enormous quantities. In our modern world there is enough bright color to guarantee the production of billions of flags and comic strips, millions of stop signs and tail lights, fire engines and Coca-Cola containers by the hundreds, thousands, carpets, wallpapers, and non-representational art by the square mile. Familiarity breeds indifference. We have seen too much pure, bright color at Woolsworth to find it intrinsically transporting, and here we may note that, by its amazing capacity to give us too much of the best things, modern technology has tended to devaluate the traditional vision-inducing materials. The illumination of a city, for example, was once a rare event, reserved for victories and national holidays, for the canonization of saints, and the crowning of kings. Now it occurs nightly, and celebrates the virtues of gin, cigarettes, and toothpaste. In London, 50 years ago, electric sky signs were a novelty, and so rare that they shone out of the misty darkness, like Captain Jules in the Carcanet. Across the Thames, on the old shot tower, the gold and ruby letters were magically lovely, Un Ferret. Today the fairies are gone. Neon is everywhere, and, being everywhere, has no effect upon us, except, perhaps, to make us pine nostalgically for primeval night. Only in floodlighting do we recapture the unearthly significance which used, in the age of oil and wax, even in the age of gas and the carbon filament, to shine forth from practically any island of brightness in the boundless darkness Under the searchlights, Notre Dame de Paris and the Roman Forum are visionary objects, having power to transport the beholder's mind towards the other world. Modern technology has had the same devaluating effect on glass and polished metal as it has had on fairy lamps and pure bright colors. By John of Patmos and his contemporaries, walls of glass were conceivable only in the New Jerusalem. Today they are a feature of every up-to-date office building and bungalow, and this glut of glass has been paralleled by a glut of chrome and nickel, of stainless steel and aluminum, and a host of allies old and new. Metal surfaces wink at us in the bathroom, shine from the kitchen sink, go glittering across country in cars and trains. Those rich convex reflections which so fascinated Rembrandt that he never tired of rendering them in paint, are now the commonplaces of home and street and factory. The fine point of seldom pleasure has been blunted. What was once a needle of visionary delight has now become a piece of disregarded linoleum.